Welcome back. I did a couple of projects over the winter and I haven't had a chance to go through the footage, but I'm doing some catch up now. What you're looking at right now is my old work table that I built myself maybe 10 or 13 years ago. I built it with a shelf on the bottom to hold, as you can see, the toolbox and some other tools, bits, routers, drills, things like that. And I decided to add another shelf about halfway through there. When I recorded this first bit of footage, by the way, there's 34 minutes of footage just compressed into these few minutes, so don't worry, I've cut out all the boring parts. But anyway, in this footage, when I recorded this, I was trying to decide how to attach the shelf because I have these 4 posts on the corners of this table, the 2x4s, and I decided in the end just to put rails down each side, and put a thin sheet of plywood across, and then maybe some support rails underneath them. Basically, you can use a piece of cardboard for a shelf as long as it's got enough support. So it didn't matter that I was using very thin plywood for this. But anyway, once I decided on what the shelf would look like and where to attach everything, I set about to get to work. And now I'm going to speed up the footage that you're seeing here, but I started off with everything on the table and had a lot of work to do. I had to take the measurements. I took a bunch of measurements. I used a level. I used some clamps to hold the boards in place that were going to end up being the rails, so I would know how long they needed to be, and made the marks on where to attach them. And then I set about getting everything off the table because it was the table that I was going to use to cut the stuff. Double checked my measurements, then I measured the wood for my cuts, got the lights set up here, and all the boards in place to do all the cutting. And here is, I guess, the obligatory video of me actually cutting the board. Took me a while to get the blade set up for the proper depth and lined up, but once I got that, it's obviously the easiest part of this is just to turn on the saw and run it across there. At this point, I'm just cutting the plywood. It's by far easier to cut with the circular saw than with the hand saw. The small boards, the 1x2s that I used for the rails, it was actually pretty easy to just cut those with a hand saw, even one of those flimsy pull saws. And here the shelf is actually ready to go. I've cut the corners out so it would fit around the 2x4s that are the corner posts. I decided to run these 1x2 rails all the way around. At this point, I don't have the cross rails on yet, but I eventually added them, screwed through the end of the posts to hold the side rails in place. In this final video, you can see that the shelf is all the way in. I've put in some side rails, not only side rails, but cross rails in the middle just to support extra weight. I had some scrap wood up on top. And I'd also shaved off the sides of the shelf where my initial measurements were slightly off and the pieces of the board were hanging off. And I used some little angle brackets, corner brackets on the end rails there to hold them in place because I didn't want to try to screw long ways through the long edge of the 2x4. But it's just high enough for my toolbox to slide underneath it. I had to take into account the depth of the rail itself as well as the shelf. But in the end, I've got enough space underneath that shelf to hold all these plastic containers of bits and screws and that toolbox that you see there. This knee pad that I use when I have to get down on the floor and rest my knees on the concrete. Sometimes I just sit on it. And on the shelf itself, I have just some clamps and a drill, and I think actually 2 drills and a jigsaw. And then around the edges, I have a bunch of clamps taped in. I still have some empty space there that I can use. Later, after recording this video, I quit actually holding the tools on that shelf, and I started using it for boards that I was about to cut. Things that didn't need to be on top just yet, but I could place them there and just reach down and grab whatever I needed to cut. Or pieces that I had just cut off, I could just slide them under there to get them out of the way. But anyway, I think I've added some improvement to my mobile work table, and over the couple of months after this, before it got too hot to work in the garage, I actually used that shelf quite a bit. So thank you for watching, and you're welcome for taking this 34 minutes of footage down to just a few minutes. We'll see you next time.